Hi everyone, hope everyone is well. Welcome to my review of Wings Over the Sea, World War II Naval Air Campaigns. This is a print and play game I picked up off Wargamevault. It is a solitaire game about torpedo and dive bombing operations during World War II. I've printed everything out. I have played quite a few games of this and I really like it. So I thought I would do a review and talk about how the game works, what I like about it, and who I think the game is for, to see if it's to your liking. And what I'll do in this review, I'll go through each of the sort of main components of the game, if you will, the rule book, the maps, the aircraft sheets, etc. And go through each of those and discuss them and show them, and as well as talk about some of the game mechanics of the game. If you're not familiar with this style of game, it is in the vein of that sort of narrative solitaire game like B-17 Queen of the Skies. It's a very different game than that, but it's in that sort of vein. You pick a plane, you go on a mission or part of a campaign, and you have a target to hit, and there are things that will happen to you as you go on that mission, and I'll talk in detail about all of those different things. So we'll make a start with the rulebook. The first thing I would say is the rulebook graphics, and the graphics of the whole game are incredibly high. I really appreciate and really like the graphic styling. It's certainly very bold. It's very pleasing to the eye. I really like the effort that's been put into the artwork and the presentation of the game. There's not too many pages on the rulebook. Now I have a fairly inexpensive home printer, I'll be honest, and it printed out very nicely. The rulebook is very spacious. You do get a bunch of aircraft sheets, and we'll have a look at those from a variety of different aircraft of World War II, both American, there's a swordfish for the British, for example, some Japanese planes, and there's some German planes as well. So you can choose which plane you would like to play in the game. I've played through with quite a few of the planes. I am a massive fan, enthusiast of World War II aircraft. I don't live too far from Imperial War Museum Duxford, which houses a great many aircraft, and some of the aircraft that feature in this game I have seen a version of in real life. And you get a bunch of maps. We'll have a look at those. You get a bunch of counters, and we'll have a look at those. You don't need to make the counters. They help a little bit, but you can use any tokens that you have, and I'll show that. 2 mission sheets and a campaign log. And I've played through a campaign with this game. The nice thing about the rulebook, it's very clear to read, and it reads incredibly well. One of the things I like about the rulebook, this is a great example, is it's very digestible. We've got clearly laid out bullet points. It takes you through how to set the game up, and that does not take long. And I'll show a setup of the game as an example when I talk about how you play through the game. You get a description of your pilot and the aircraft itself, and we'll have a look at more of those when we look at the actual aircraft sheets. Got a description of the map, description of the game turn. I'll talk about the game turn when I talk about some of the mechanics when I've got the game set up. The game turn does not take very long. In fact, a mission does not take very long. This is a very quick flowing, very natural flowing game. I've played some sessions in like 15 minutes, something like that. Some have taken a bit longer. Depends on what happens on your mission, your sortie, as it were. But it goes through all the detail of all the things that you can do in the turn, the format of the turn, and like I said, I'll go through that in detail. The other thing that's interesting with this game is a little bit of depth into, you can either, depending on the aircraft you choose, you can either go and try and bomb your target ship or ships, or there are anti-submarine rules. So depending on the plane, there are some planes that we use in this anti-submarine role, and you can play through that. And there's a section on the rules for anti-submarine. So in that sense, you can play. Some evenings I would play through playing, certain type of plane and bombing a target or trying to, and then the other evening I'd play an anti-submarine role, and I really enjoyed that. There are, with the anti-submarine roles, there are some advanced optional rules as well, so it has a little bit of depth to it, extra depth there. There is a campaign game where effectively you are playing through a series of missions, and there are some rules associated with that, especially if you get shot down, which my plane has done many times. Then we're into our credits. Now there is a more, I think this is 0.5.0. There is a more up-to-date version of the rulebook. I downloaded it, but this rulebook is, I've had the game about a month, I think, something like that. It's more than sufficient for me. And there is an introduction into the historical side of the sea warfare, air-to-sea warfare during World War II. So if you're not so familiar with the subject matter, there's a very nice introduction to that, and it's a good starting point for you to go away and do your own research if you choose. You don't have to know anything about this period of World War II to play and enjoy the game. If you do, you'll certainly get a lot more from it, and I would recommend doing some research, whether that's through reading books or through history videos on YouTube, etc. But I very much enjoyed, and very much it was in agreement with the introduction to the history side. I found it a very enjoyable read. I have several books on this subject matter. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly it was good just for that overview. And then we have one of our most recent campaigner logs that I got shot down in. So yeah, not too many pages on the rulebook. Let's have a quick count. Including the history, 13 pages. You can probably go through and get a sense of the game in one reading, sort of allow 15-20 minutes. And to be honest with you, after you've done that, you can pretty much start playing the game. It is a very straightforward game to play through, and you'll learn as you play through the mechanics, is how I played through it. And I can remember the first time I played, I had absolutely no issues whatsoever with any of the rules. They're very clear, very nicely written. It's a great rule book to read and enjoy, and I certainly have done that. So next we'll have, I think, a look at the actual plane sheets. Here we have printed out the plane sheets that came with the game, and I'll just talk and show some of these and highlight some areas around them. You've got details, game mechanic details for the plane itself, its defense value, so maneuver score, formation. I'll talk more about trying to keep them in formation is one of the key things. You get a sense, it's an abstraction, you get a sense that you're piloting a plane as a grouping of planes, and that grouping of planes has a formation level. Being in the good formation is good. Being in the loose or no formation is bad. And this will happen quite a lot in the game, and you'll try and keep your planes in formation. And that's one of the sort of key mechanics. And I'll talk more about how all these different charts work. What is interesting with this game, compared to a lot of solitaire narrative games, is that a lot of the charts that you'll be using, the tables that you'll be using, are included on the aircraft sheet itself. And this means that you don't need a lot of space to play this game. In fact, at some point in this video, I will show an example of the game laid out, how I have been playing it with the relevant sheets in the order that I would use them. But it's not a game where you are having to sift through, I should say, a book of charts and tables, which is normal for sort of solitaire war games like this. It's very streamlined, and a lot of the charts and tables are here on the sheet itself. So we've got a very nice piece of artwork for our aircraft. This is the Douglas Dauntless, one of my favourite planes, and I have here the dates and the IDs for the campaign for the Coral Sea 1942. So you can play this game perfectly well, just going on a mission as a one-off and play through the mission and see what your target is. So for example, if we're playing in February 1942, we roll a dice to see what our target is. And you do need to, it's a print and play game, so you need to provide yourself a couple of D6. You don't need many. I think I normally play with 2. And we make it a target of a cruiser or a destroyer or a convoy. And that target or sort of shifts through the different dates. So there's a 1 in 6 chance of it being a destroyer in 1942, whereas in May we can see it's a 5 or 6 for a destroyer. And then in also in May you can target a aircraft carrier, for example. So if you play through the campaign, you're playing through each of these missions in order. And this details about the amount of escorts that you'll be receiving. Again, this fluctuates. So February 1942, there's a 50-50 chance you'll have no escorts. Whereas towards the end of May, you'll always get an escort. It's just the level of the escort that changes. And there are also some notes as well. So if you're playing through a campaign, and I do recommend the campaign, it's one of the things I really enjoy about this game. It's one of the things I enjoy about solitaire narrative games as well, in fairness. But just this sense of sticking with the same plane, you become very attached to your pilot and your plane. And unfortunately, sometimes you do get shot down and you start again, as is the way of these type of games. So that's the Dauntless. We have an Avenger. And one thing I will talk about when we show the game set up, we'll talk about the damage track. Now, some of these stats are unique to, well, not unique, they vary from plane to plane. The Avenger is very similar to the Dauntless, for example, but here we are with our short Sunderland, and this is an anti-submarine aircraft. And that is in some ways is quite different. It has its own search chart here. The damage track is different for the short Sunderland compared to the Avenger, for example. So there's a variety of, again, beautifully laid out. One of the things I really enjoy about this game is that even with the home printing on my very inexpensive home printer, and I print a lot of games out at home, obviously my own games that I make, constantly printing those out and play testing them, but also other people's games. This game looks great, nicely laid out, it's very spacious, it's very easy to read. I did not come across anything in playing this game where I was like, oh, there's a mistake there, that's not right, etc, etc. And I have played through a bunch of campaigns with a bunch of aircraft, and I've also played through some, single games with the aircraft. So, if we go quickly through them, here's our swordfish, for example. So, interestingly, the swordfish, for example, as benefits the history. This maneuver stat is 0. That's not good. Whereas if we compare it to the short Sunderland, for example, that was a maneuver of 1. And the Avenger had a maneuver of 1. So there's a variety in the stats of the aircraft. And if you choose to, you can play as the Axis. And we have here a Heinkel as an example. And it's a good selection of aircraft. So we've got our Japanese, again, the campaign of the Coral Sea. So what you can do if you want, and I enjoyed this very much. I had 2 campaigns running simultaneously, one from the American perspective and one from the Japanese perspective. And I was playing one evening as the Americans, the next evening as the Japanese. And I really enjoyed that. It makes the appreciation of the history interesting, etc, etc. You don't have to. That's the way I did it and enjoyed it very much too. We've got our Douglas Devastator. And again, you can see very nicely laid out, beautiful illustrations included. And then we've got our final Japanese plane here. So you get a good selection of planes. You don't need to print them all out. If you only want to play as the Americans, just print out the American sheets. There's no requirement to print them all out at all. In fact, that's probably true of quite a few parts of the game. You don't need to print out the rulebook, for example. I like a physical copy. I like to sit there and drink a cup of tea and read through a rulebook. One of my pleasures in life. So I like printing them all out. And they print out very nicely, very well laid out, beautifully put together, and the graphics styling and the detail. And definitely in terms of the production quality, the quality of the layout and materials is absolutely excellent. So here we have our maps printed out. You get 6 maps, but depending on the campaign, you can choose which sort of aesthetic background you would like. And you can probably just about, they don't show up too well on the camera, I'm afraid, because it's quite a sunny day here. It's quite unusual this time of year. But if we're playing the Coral Sea, for example, I'll use this style. I can just see some background sort of map imagery here. We've got a quote. There's Solomon Island there, for example. That's all just on the art side. What is important is the gameplay parts of the map. And you can roll a dice to determine which map you're playing on, or you just pick one. They all operate in the same mechanics. You start on the E, you leave on the X. So when you start a mission, you'll put your playing counter in here, first hex, and you go through the different hexes and all the way to the end. And at these large hexes here, in the B hexes, this is where you'll be targeting and attacking your intended target, depending on what you rolled as to what your target would be. And there are choices you can make as to the route, but normally speaking, the hexes, this one goes to that one, and so forth, as you'd expect. It's all very straightforward, depending on your choosing. There are the pattern of the hex of the map there's some variety, but it is entirely up to you which ones you use. I just picked one out at random, to be honest with you, but you can roll for them, etc, etc, etc. Very nicely done, very nicely laid out. You obviously, when you're playing through a game, you are only using one of the maps. So this is map 5, that's map 6. You'll be playing on map 5 or map 6. You're not playing on both. However, saying that, you could simultaneously, if you wanted to, run two games, but that might get a little bit confusing. But certainly, I'm only ever playing on one map, and they're just duplicated up to make your home printing easier. You could mount them if you want, but there's not a lot of components that go on the map, so it's very clean and it's very straightforward. And as you can see, as you're going through each of these different hexes, you're going to roll to see what happens, see if you encounter any enemy planes, etc. And then when you get into your target hex, you'll be rolling to see as you attack that target and hopefully hit it, and then make your way and get your plane back home. So you can see there's not too many different hexes to fly through. Very nicely done. I appreciate the variety. The graphic styling is very nice. In fact, it's incredibly well done. Definitely a lot of time and effort has been put into the layouts of the various maps that you have in the game. And I also appreciate the fact you get multiple maps. I think it's a nice touch. It gives you more sense of replayability for the game. Fundamentally, the game plays, in terms of its mechanics, the same way, regardless of the map that you have picked. But it does give that extra sense of depth and value to the game. So now I'm going to talk about the mission sheet, and I've just laid a map next to it because there's a correlation between the two things that I just want to highlight. So on our mission sheet, first thing is our different targets. So remember at the beginning, when you set your game up and you choose what mission you would like, you're going to roll to see what your target is. If you're playing through a campaign, the mission you're playing is the next mission on the campaign, and that's on the playing sheet that I showed earlier. So, for example, you may have a target that's a battleship or a cruiser, or for example, depending on what you rolled on the beginning of the game. You also record your current level of escort fighters. Having escort fighters is very good. Having enemy fighters is very bad. So you can put a token or one of the counters that comes with the game, you can print it out, mount it to a bit of card if you want, and you can use those to record your current level of both escort fighters and enemy fighters. And when I show a mock-up of how I play the game, there's not a huge number of things to record. These are one of the key things you have to keep an eye on and record. So then we have our mission sheet itself, and we have a bunch of different events. These correlate to when you move into a new hex, we'll call them, a new sector. Then you would use the letter from that sector or hex to determine what of these or which of these you would roll on. So you start off in A, so you would use event A, 1d6 to determine what happens. A 3 or 4, no event. 5, for example, your formation level changes by a -1. A 1 or 2 is an enemy check. And when I show the mock-up of the game, we'll talk more about how all those different things work. But it's a very clear, and this is why all these letters are different. So you'll roll on different events to determine. So for example, if we've got an event G, now there's not a G on this map, so this is where some of the maps, oh, there's a G, great. So event G, for example, an enemy check on a 1 to 3 and an enemy check on a 4, although there's different numbers associated, and I'll detail that. So there's more likely chance of seeing an enemy in a G compared to a, for example. So there's and again, this is where some of your choices, so there are points where you can choose which hexes you want to go into, for example. There's not many. That's what has some bearing on the results of the different events, for example. So very streamlined, very clear. Again, very nicely laid out. It's very readable. It's very playable when you've got it on the table. For someone who wears glasses or reading glasses when I'm playing games, nice big font. The graphic language is always very clear in this game, which I definitely very much appreciated, especially with a game like this, which is very quick to set up. It's very quick to play. Playing through the game with these considerations and these artistic choices that have been made, I definitely very much appreciated, and I think it's one of the things that stands out about the game, the level of the quality of the layout and all the thought that has gone into it. And these are great examples. Now, if you're playing an anti-submarine mission, and again, remember at the beginning we talked about some of them planes are bombers effectively, and they'll be bombing their targets, and some of them are anti-submarines, and they'll be trying to be sinking the enemy type submarines, again, which you've decided at the beginning of the game and roll to see what happens. You've got a different sheet here for the anti-submarine mission, and it works it pretty much works exactly the same way. You've got different targets, the details of those. The details of the targets, I'm just going to go back a little bit, happen when you attack the target. And there's charts to roll on to determine what happens when you go into. So if you go into if you're into this large B hex, we'll call it here, then you would roll on event B to see if there's enemies, and again that varies depending on the target that you have. So for example, there's more chance of finding enemies with a battleship compared to, say, than a cruiser, he says very quickly. More chance to find enemies with a target convoy. And sometimes you're rolling on some of these charts 1d6, and some of them you're rolling on 2d6, so you need a couple of dice. And then you'll also be rolling when you attack. There are modifiers, which I'll talk about, and then you can roll to see if you've done light damage or hopefully critical damage, and earn yourself some nice victory points for doing so. So again, very nicely laid out, very detailed, but very clear and very quick to get to the relevant piece of information that you need to get to. Here I've got the game set up. Now this is pretty much how I have been playing it. I've got my aircraft sheet and I've picked the Dauntless from my favourites, and I have picked a map. I stuck with map 5 for this example, and I have determined the target, which is a convoy. So I've used this counter. Now, in terms of the counters for the game, as I've previously said, you do get a counter sheet, and I printed them out and stuck them to some cards. You don't need to. You can use any sort of counters that you like, or you can use dice or anything at all. But I use the ones that come with the game, and they're nicely done, very clear. Got a nice graphic of the plane dropping its weaponry. So I've got a counter here to remind myself that's the target here. I've got a counter here to tell me the number of escort fighters. So on this particular mission, let's suppose I have 1 escort fighter. Got a counter here to remind myself of any enemy fighters that I may encounter during the game. So not a huge number of counters on this sheet. On the plane sheet itself, there are a few counters that you'll need. So we track our stamina level. Stamina is you can use to re-roll dice if you want. Think of it as another sort of bite at the apple, if that's an expression you understand. So you can use them for that. However, and this is where some of the depth of the game comes in, historical nods and a little bit of chrome. This particular aircraft, has a dive bombing rule. And the dive bombing rule says, discard 1 stamina point or suffer a -2 dice roll modifier in the attack action. So that is bad. So you've got to keep hold of 1 stamina point. So when you come to dive bomb your target, and my target is the convoy, and the convoy target's always in this large B zone here, and I can see on the damage chart here, I would roll a d6, and would have an attack modifier. If I get a -2 for that, then on a 1, 2, or 3, I would miss the target, and which would not be good. So I'm going to keep 1 stamina point back so that when I dive bomb the target, I don't suffer that modifier. So what you spend your stamina points on is your choice, and it is one of the elements of the game where the player decision making is important in the game. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one of the key ones. So I'm also keeping track of my formation level. As I said previously, being in good formation is good. Being in a bad formation, very bad. So we want to try and keep in good formation. And the formation dice roll, this is basically a -1 or -2. That is a dice roll modifier that you will be having to use. So for example, when we are, let's pick an example here. If we're trying to evade, we would use the maneuver, that's a maneuver modifier. If we're doing a pilot check, the formation that we're in has an impact, and the formation check has an impact, for example. We're also using the counter to keep hold of our maneuver level, which is a 1. And again, we use that as a dice roll modifier on some of the specific charts. So if we're trying to evade, then our maneuver numeric is a modifier, as is our escort level, fighter's level. And you can quickly kind of see, even that very quick example, the modifiers to the charts are recorded. You record them on these 2 sheets of paper here, and it's very streamlined. I'm also keeping a track of any wounds the pilot may have suffered, hopefully not. And I'm tracking the damage level of the aircraft. I want to talk about that just for a second, because we haven't touched on the damage itself. So on to the left here, just off camera, normally what I do when I play this game, I do keep the rulebook to hand, but there are numerous pages in the rulebook that you'll be using, just as a reminder, and there are numerous that you simply don't need to. So I keep a sort of more condensed versions. I'm only referring to some of the specific pages, for example. And because I'm doing this video, I want to try and do a good job of explaining the game. So the taking the damage, for example, that is a sheet I would keep to hand. So as you take damage and you're moving the damage counter up through the chart, or through the track, I should say, the damage track, you'll hit these letters here. So M is for maneuver. So if you hit M, if you've taken damage, you'd hit M and your maneuver would go down. So I might put a -1 counter to remind myself that my maneuver is now suffered a -1, so it's now a 0, etc, etc, etc. DV lowers the defense value. So again, I might use one of these minus counters to put that next to my defense value so I can keep track of the defense value of my aircraft, for example. And you can see on this particular aircraft, as I move the damage through the damage track, I lose a maneuver point there, I lose a defense value there, I lose another defense value there, and then C is a roll on die called the critical damage table. Oh dear, if you get that, that is bad. And the critical damage table again is here on your sheet. So for example, I can take more damage, I can lose more maneuver, more defense value, or this is all bad. For me, the pilot can be wounded, or indeed the bomb can be lost and I cannot target my target anymore and must then keep moving until the end of the map. So as you can see, all the tables that you need are on this sheet or on this sheet, and it's as simple as that. And then by selecting the pages of the rulebook that you'll need, you can keep the game footprint to be quite small and very condensed, and you don't need a huge number of these. I'll put some more on here just to illustrate the point. And you get a good selection, so you can print them all out. You don't need to. You can just print out and mount a selection. On the actual map itself, I just place the counter of the zone I'm currently in. I can recall which zones I've passed through. You can, if you want, place markers to show the ones you've been through if you choose, or if you put under plexi, for example, whatever you prefer. You don't need to. And then you will need 2d6. I think just saying the rulebook ones, I always play with 2 that's separate because ASL. So I can't help it. In terms of, just to go through some of the key sort of game mechanics. So let's talk about the game turn itself. So we have our event phase. So as you're moving into a new zone, here we go, then you're checking on there. You're rolling a dice, 1d6, to see what can happen. If we get an enemy check, for example, so on this event here, I'll just use this as a nice easy example. We're in we're in event A, we use event A, we roll 1d6, and if we get an enemy check 5, for example, roll 1 dice, and if we get a 5 or more, then we raise the enemy fighters by 1. So if it was on 0, it's now on a 1, for example. And determining what result you get here, you just refer to the page in the rulebook, put it here just to the side of the game turn. It's very streamlined. So for example, what other events can we have? A formation of -1. So the formation of -1, we reduce the formation level by -1. So we were at good, we're now at loose, for example, and so forth. So from good to loose. So it doesn't go from good to 0. It goes from good to loose, and then it would go from loose to no formation whatsoever, and that's very bad. Other results we can have. We've got a pilot or stamina -1. So we would execute a pilot check. If the check is not successful, you must discard 1 stamina. So here's our pilot check. There's our chart there for a pilot check. You roll the 3d6 and you add your maneuver and you add your formation modifiers. So it's a good example of why keeping your maneuver good and your formation good will help you. If you get a good result, you get success. And if not, you get failure. And if I failed that check, for example, I would lose 1 stamina. And I need to keep that stamina because I may choose to re-roll some re-rolls. I certainly need to keep it for that dive bombing ability there. So in that example, you can see it's very straightforward. Depending on the results, you're not having to go through a document or a booklet with 20 pages of charts or anything like that. Everything is here. Everything is immediate. You can just cross-reference once you've been through a couple of these different areas, you completely will understand the results here. Check the rulebook, which is basically 1 or 2 pages of the rulebook, and use the according chart, for example, here. Now, if we get once we've done our event phase, so we've been through, we've rolled on here, etc., then we'll do a fighter combat. If both escort and enemy fighters are present, then we'll do our enemy attack if enemy fighters are present, and then we'll do our player action, and then we'll move on to our advance to the next text. So, for example, if we do, let's pick one of these, fighter combat. Here's an example of this. So if both escort and enemy fighters are present, well, in this scenario they are actually, then roll on the fighter combat table, applying as modifier the difference between the escort fighters and the enemy fighters. So we find our, let me just check where this is. So we're checking on the fighter combat table, which is here. And we would roll 1d6, apply the modifiers to it. We may suffer -1 escort, oh no, -1 enemy, yay, that's what we want, -2 enemies, and so forth and so forth. So a quick glance back at the rulebook. Some, like all these sort of narrative games, sometimes you'll go through several zones, you'll never encounter any enemies, and then you'll never have to do it. It's not like you have to do these things every single time. That's just not the case. When you've been through those different phases, then you'll move into the next text. Now, the one phase I do want to talk a little bit about is the player action phase. The rulebook does a really good job explaining you going through all these different components of the sort of turn, as it were, and you do have to go through each one. But like I said, some of them, depending on what's happening, you can skip them, basically. But the one that is important is the player action phase. And in this phase, you can do several actions. You can do a formation check, you can do a planning, you can do an evade, and you can do an attack. Okay. Now the formation check enables the player to improve the formation level. So if I was at a formation of loose, oh no, not good, I want to improve that, then I can go through that and roll on the formation check table, which, surprise, surprise, is just on my sheet here. And I can use my maneuver modifier and my formation modifier to see if I can improve my formation level. If I want to do planning, and I can only do one of these things. So I can do a formation check, or I can do planning. For example, if I want to do planning, I can roll on my pilot check table, which is here. And again, maneuver and formation have a modifier here. And if as a result of that, I can get a bonus, which I can apply to whatever chart of the charts that I'm able to do so. If you get a success, for example, you can add a +1 modifier. Where is it? +1 modifier on formation check, attack, or evade. So I go, I'm going to attack. I'm down here. I'm going to attack. So I'll have that +1 modifier onto that. And the rulebook does a really good job of explaining through all these things. Probably way better than I just have done. And you simply do not need many pages of the rulebook open to you. So just to go over that again, you move through to a different zone. You roll to see what happens in the zone. Depending on if you've got escorts and if you've got enemy fighters, you'll then roll on a couple of tables to see what the result of that. You may take damage. You may have your formation level change or your maneuver level change, etc., etc., etc. And it's very streamlined, and you can do that whole turn sometimes in literally a couple of minutes. Sometimes it can take longer, especially if you've got enemy fighters there and so forth. Now, the one last thing I probably should touch on is the attack. So this is where you're attacking your target, and your target for me, for example, is the convoy. So it's here. So you're going to roll on the attack table, which is, let me just remind myself where that is. So it's right in front of me here. And again, I'm using my maneuver and I'm using my formation. So this is why I keep going on about being in a good formation is really advantageous. And I want to keep that stamina point for my dive bomber, so I don't want that -2. So I could roll on there and see. So if I get, for example, a +1, for example, on my attack, then when I come to do the damage, then I'll roll on here, and I use that +1 to see what damage I incur on my enemy here. So hopefully I can get 6 and get sunk. 5 victory points. Good for the Americans. So there's a correlation between the relationship between the charts, basically. Next, I think I'll just give a quick surmise about my experiences playing the game and just touch on some of the key points that I've talked about in this video. I just want to give some concluding thoughts. I really enjoy playing through this game. I enjoy the streamlined design. I enjoy the historical topic. Absolutely do. I did some research on some of the planes that I didn't know so much about. I enjoyed doing that. I'm a keen player of historical games in general. I do really like solitaire narrative games in this sort of format. The things I liked about this specific game of that genre, if you will. Number one, it doesn't take a lot of table space. It doesn't take long to set up. It doesn't take long to play through a mission. Give yourself half an hour, comfortable. You might be able to get through 2 missions maybe, or one longer one, depending on what you encounter. There are a lot of player decisions to be made. It's not the case that you're just rolling to see what happens and you're playing out the game in that way. You do have some important decisions to make, and you do have important decisions to make not only at the beginning of the game as to what format you want, what plane you want, what mission you want to do you want to roll to see what your target is, or do you want to pick the target? And sometimes I'll deliberately pick targets. But also during each turn, you have got to try and balance the plane to try and get yourself in the best position to hit the target in that B sector, and whilst keeping the plane alive, as it were. So keeping your formation level, etc. You know, and sometimes lady luck in the dice can be favourable, and sometimes not so much, and you have to contend with that and deal with that to the best you can. And I enjoy that process. I really enjoy the graphic layout of the game. It's incredibly clear. It's incredibly easy to read. As I've said many times, and especially that last segment, everything is here and here. On this sheet and this sheet, and a couple of pages from the rule book. And that's all you need. You don't need a huge table to play it. It's not going to take, if you wanted to play through a campaign in the evening, and there are times when I've played with this game and other narrative sort of solitaire games of this ilk, I've played through mission after mission after mission for a whole, couple of hours, and really enjoyed that process. But if you also want something you can set up quite quickly, if you travel with work or with life and you want to take a game with you, you don't need a lot of stuff with this game. And it can be played on a very small sort of footprint area on a table, for example. You don't need to print out the counters. You can. You don't need to print out all the plane sheets. You can. It's entirely up to you. So in that respect, it really is very adaptable to what you want to do with the time you have to play games. And I really enjoy that. Overall, and the last thing I would say, it's a print and play game. It is not expensive. I think I paid $8 for this. And I think the amount of enjoyment I have got for my $8, or the equivalent as it gets converted to your currency, is absolutely fantastic. It's a beautifully produced game. I had zero problems with the rules or not clearly understanding. I'm not saying I got every single rule correct. I'm not even saying I've got every single rule correct in this video, but enough to enjoy the game and get the enjoyment out playing through the mission and attacking the target and seeing if I can sink it, and then getting my plane safely home. So in that respect, excellent value for money. It's not the same mission over and over and over and over again. There is variety. Sometimes you have to make the variety for yourself. So, you know, like I said, I've run simultaneous campaigns with different planes. So that's how I get that variety. So, but you don't have to do it however you want. So overall, big thumbs up for me. If you have never played a narrative solitaire game where you are going through a series of events and rolling to see what happens and then determining what you do based on what's happening to you and forward thinking, I think this is a brilliant introductory example to that. It's low cost. It doesn't, as in, you know, it doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't need a lot of space. It's quick to read through the rule book, and you can get an idea from this game, a good idea from this game, if this is a type of game, solitaire gaming experience you enjoy. For that reason, I highly recommend it as a very low cost introductory solitaire, I call them narrative games, whatever you want to call them, type gaming experience. For that, it's absolutely fantastic. It's also brilliant, I think, for people who don't have a lot of time. They want games that they can play through quickly, games that are easy to set up. And I also think it's a great game for those of us who enjoy this aspect of history. And that is true of nearly every single historical war game, right? If you enjoy the subject matter, if you're into the subject matter, or you want to learn more about it and you use the game as a springboard to learn more about the subject matter, brilliant. And it is excellent for that. And the fact you don't have to play, you can play the different nations or not, entirely up to you. And so for that, the amount of content that you get in the game, I think is fantastic. Big thumbs up for me. Probably one of the highlights of this year, I would say, for me. I had no expectations going into this game. I bought it, I saw it on one of the Facebook groups, I think, looked at it on Wargamevault, went, that looks great, $8, yeah, great. Printed it out and absolutely fell in love with it, and have played it numerous times, so value for money is off the charts. As you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic about this. Please check it out, see if it's for you. If you've never played this type of game, highly recommend it for a sort of dip your toe in before you then go and, you know, spend a load of money on boxed games of this type of genre. But yeah, that's it from me. If you've played it, please leave any thoughts in the comments section. And yeah, massive recommendation, and take care. See you soon. Thank you. Bye.